Okay, right where I left off, picking up. If you haven't watched part one, I'd recommend go do it. I'm just going to be going through in this video five more MCU Origin Story films and discussing how they fit into this origin story formula as a way of arguing that there is a deeper symbolic meaning, or specifically, I'm going through the origin story formula to sort of show how by my analysis, I arrived at the individual central themes that I apply to the individual heroes. As part of that, and going through the exercise, I'm inevitably going to discuss these things and argue that there is a deeper symbolic component to these films. I had to split it up because I just couldn't keep talking continuously, although that was only a few minutes ago. So this is kind of like getting the whole way through, but we still got several more films and then what I want to talk about at the end. And appropriately enough, as a break point, we ended at the end of phase one. Then we're coming in here at phase two. And, well, I'm doing Guardians of the Galaxy at the very end because that one deviates from the formula the most. At least I think so. And once again, Ant-Man's probably the other one that deviates from the formula in the most, and in a lot of ways almost makes it not really fit. But I actually like the Ant-Man movie a lot. I still think overall it's one of the weakest MCU movies. I don't think the production challenges it had are any small factor in that. I think most of the criticisms I'd have and a lot of people would have are explained by rush production. But compared to the other films, it seems more mundane, focused on telling us about the characters rather than showing us a lot of stuff to see them act. Keeping the lower stakes actually makes the movie, I think it's a strength, not a fault. But this film has a lot of exposition compared to some of the others, which is odd since it's like more grounded. But admittedly, the story has two different characters that are versions of Ant-Man, and that makes it unique. But I was pleasantly surprised when I saw it to see Hank Pym be a main character rather than just a peripheral character, since he doesn't wear the suit, though that splits the focus a bit in analyzing the hero. I'm just going to focus on Scott Lang. A very similar analysis could be applied to Hank Pym. So, heroic trait, morality. Weird, right? Moral judgment, doing good, striving to help others. Not unique to Scott Lang. It's explored pretty much in all of these movies. It's a fundamental piece of heroism. Here, by morality, I mean moral judgment. I say that's the trait that Scott exemplifies. I'm referring to him making moral decisions within a complex, overlapping systems of morality. He has the laws derived from the morality of society, the moral duty he has, to one's family and children, any greater sense of justice beyond those. Perhaps justice would work as well as better for describing it. I think it's a matter of sort of preference on those words. But he breaks the law to help others and is willing to break the law again to help his family, sort of. I mean, Scott is a fugitive wielding secret technology for what he believes is good. Most characters in the MCU like that are villains. Scott isn't a villain, and the only reason that Hank picks him is because of his past actions. Hank's effectively approving of Scott's moral judgment and the responsibility he has to his family. Hank himself also explores the concept of morality. He has developed something amazing, but withholds it from others because he believes it would do more harm than good. Hank cites, he hides his discoveries and even sabotages others going down that road because he believes that's the right thing to do, sort of the greater good. In terms of worldly attainment, Scott has attained little. He's just suffered for making his moral choice, or at least it's arguable it was moral, but for this, I'm going to say the movie kind of argues it's the case. He's lost everything he had in the world. This is what, any wealth he had, his family are estranged from him. Compared to some of the other characters, though, like, say, Stark, we never really see Scott seeming to worry much that his choices are wrong. It's like he doesn't even act unless he knows the actions are, he's walked through the morality. This is explored a little bit in Ant-Man and the Wasp, where Scott has a lot of trouble even articulating why he helped Captain America. Like, when he's criticized that he didn't consider all the possibilities, he's just kind of like, well, yeah, it was the morally correct thing to do. He didn't really think about it. And again, he suffered for that choice as well. In terms of suffering, yes, Scott has lost. Or I guess, compared to the other heroes, he has a family, and you can consider that its own type of attainment. Although, again, especially in this movie, it's like he's starting from ground zero. Yes, he has the background of having the family, but he has to earn that back again. They're literally divorced from him, estranged from him, and he can't spend time with them, and he has to earn that again. So it's not like he even has that at the start of this story. In terms of suffering, yes, Scott's lost everything due to his past choice that he believed to be morally correct. The heroic power, the Ant-Man suit, shrinking technology, its manifestation, its reward. It's indeed Scott's well-adapted moral judgment, as judged by Hank Pym, leads to him attaining the suit. He also goes through the diligence of stealing the suit. It's unclear that this is relevant to test anything beyond Scott's skills. He doesn't really connect to morality, so But refinement, this is a little broken here, in part because it's so direct. I mean, the refinement is his training, and we literally have a training montage this time. We had like an invention montage with Iron Man, or a magic learning montage with Doctor Strange, which we'll come to. Here we've got a training montage where he goes from a zero to a pro. But Scott receives advice and instruction from two superior experts, which makes sense. Throughout this process, Scott's morality isn't challenged any more so than just sticking to the project, committing to it, and he doesn't really have options. Ideally, it'd be better if there was a more direct emphasis on these parallels. Like at one point, Scott points out that he understands he's risking his life in this mission. This moment's actually used to characterize Hank. And I think that movie could have been extended, just that like Scott understands he's expendable and that risk is part of Hank's plan and that he gets that because Hank loves his daughter and Scott is doing the same. He's doing that risk because it's worth providing for his daughter should he succeed. Because that means Scott's doing it to earn the money for his family by being hired by Hank as a thief. It's a little weird. Again, morality, right? It actually kind of fits in the sense of that you can think about these things of like, is that right? Does that make sense? Is that right to do? But yeah, when you write it on paper, it's very awkward. Like that, our hero of the day is doing it for money, and he's doing it for money because he can't find another job. I mean, it's characterized that way. So, but yeah, and that's made even weirder than after being arrested for Captain America. It's just clear. Anyway, rival. Darren Cross. More directly the rival than the mastermind. Yeah, he's also kind of the mastermind. Although Hank's the one scheming against Cross. But power without the trait. Darren has the technology and the power of Ant-Man and is explicitly amoral. I mean, he doesn't appear to be evil or misanthropic, just apathetic. He's unwilling to question what he's doing. It's highlighted very well in his taunt to the buyers. He sees himself as just a piece of a pipeline. He has no moral obligation to question the technology or what it would be used for beyond just making it and making a profit. And then, quite swiftly, this movie doesn't really have that mastermind component to it. We can argue, Darren has his own worldly attainment. Is it due to his amorality? I don't know. In general, I'd prefer to just consider all this a failure outright. The other movies clearly have multiple antagonists. This one doesn't, so it doesn't really fit. Like as I said, the corrupted trait idea doesn't really fit. I mean, Darren's apathy is more amorality than it is corrupted morality. And it's not that he cares about power in the right hands. Like we even have Obadiah Stane who says that among the stuff he does, that he wants money, he wants power, but he also wants to defend the status quo. Cross has his own goals and hang-ups, but doesn't really care about the technology beyond what it means to his business, what it means to his relationship with Hank. And I could really stretch things and claim Hank Pym is the mastermind in that he's the one that sets up the conflict of these movies. I'm not gonna do that. I mean, I'll talk about it here, but I'm not gonna do it for the purposes of counting how it fits this pattern, because that's just like me trying to earn points to the thing that the rubric that I established. But that by making, if Hank Pym's the mastermind, then by making the mastermind hero, the film sort of synergistically is asking the audience, hey, contemplate the morality. Is Hank a hero? Is Hank a villain? Are his actions morally good or not? Yeah, it's pretty far stretched to make a claim like that. Interesting that you can do it, but it clearly represents Hank as a good guy. Um, so yeah, Ant Man's weird. It fails to match the formula in a lot of ways. I think it's the most actually. Yeah, pretty sure at the end, when we compare them all, it's the one that fits the formula most poorly. Ultimately, these deviations do make the movie simpler, and it probably is the simplest of all these movies. Although, like Iron Man 1, a lot of what it has compared to some of the others is simplified by having sympathetic parallels between the symbols and what's actually happening on the screen. Good writing. Here, it just seems like an abbreviation, like everything kind of shortened or edited out or absent to made smaller, if you will. But either way, I still like Ant Man a lot. Hank Pym's one of my favorite characters from the comics, so I like seeing him in the MCU. I'm not how much that biases my judgment. I don't know, but I just remember going in and being like, yeah, it was not that great of a movie by MCU standards, but it's fine. It's fine. I liked it well enough. Here we go. Black Panther. Um, this is another weird one. While Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange introduce sort of new worlds to the MCU, Black Panther builds upon a secret world within our world. In my opinion, Black Panther's actually, I think Black Panther handles world building pretty well. Particularly the aspects of world building, like trying to pull the audience into the fictional culture, exploring fantastical ideas by showing places and that the audience can think about and explore. You can kind of flip that and criticize it and say, oh, it's not giving you enough detail, but I mean, there's some balance there. I don't know what it is. In a future video, I'll probably compare Black Panther and Thor 1 because there's a ton of structural similarities between these movies. I actually think that says something. The secondary villain here, even compared to even just like in Thor 1, gets killed by the mastermind as a way of trying to be like, ha, I'm getting one up on the hero, at least in a kind of way. Um, but yeah. So, Black Panther, what heroic trait do I think he most represents or emphasizes? I'm going at independence. Another symbol that's really hard to find a single word for. By this I mean independence of thought is probably one of the better ways to describe it. Self-reliance, being self-critical, able to think, analyze, and make decisions for oneself. Compared to T'Challa in the comics or the complete mystery that he was in Civil War, they split sort of aspects of T'Challa's personality into other characters. At least that's how I see it, with like patriotism in Okoye, invention in Shuri, cleverness in Nakia. I think that was a very smart way to take a Paragon character and dissect them, because it gives you more characters and gives you a way to compare and contrast the characters against each other, which at very least generates dialogue, and that's a lot better than like sometimes the Paragon stories, including ones that are focused on just like the Black Panther character. Sometimes it's just, hey, he does everything on his own, so I mean he's awesome. He's not going to talk while he does it, but it's a story. But I think in some ways that kind of doesn't leave that much for T'Challa himself. He ends up being like the everyman or the point of view character through this, and it's kind of like a vessel for the audience to follow the main story, rather than being a strong standout hero. But anyway, I say T'Challa embodies independence as a heroic trait, and by this I mean acting autonomously and making decisions for himself rather than obeying others or obeying orders or listening to the systems that he's within, that he needs. It's not, I'm king and I have rules and traditions, I have to rule by them. He's very much like, no, I'm T'Challa, I want to do the right thing, so I have to constantly be self-critical and analyze and think what's going on. In a lot of ways, his central conflict is just to not become his father, not to be just the puppet of others or the embodiment of his own vision of what he thought was the right answer, rather than just having to actually work his way through everything. He starts the film hoping to embody his father. He learns about his father's failings and then chooses that he wants to become something more than what his father was. He wants to be a superior version in the next generation. He's going to take responsibility for those mistakes, for his own mistakes, and by that's very heroic by contrast, particularly to the villain. To me, saying Black Panther's heroic independence, it leaves me a little underwhelmed. Partly because T'Challa seemingly very willing to think on his own and defy tradition, as we first see him in Civil War. I'm not saying that as a criticism of the Black Panther film. It's just one of, I still think it's one of the most interesting symbolic movies in the MCU, and you'll see that very soon through what I'm going to work through. But my complaint is reminiscent, actually, of a lot of complaints people had, or that I heard, about Thor's progression from Thor 1 through the Avengers. That in these movies, Civil War to Black Panther, T'Challa's learning and solidifying his independence seemingly a bit odd in contrast to how he was acting in Civil War. It's never directly stated, but heavily implied, that T'Challa broke a lot of rules to become Black Panther in Civil War. He donned the suit and he got the strength prematurely. At least the first few scenes in the Black Panther movie, he needs to formally be bestowed Black Panther suit and powers. So a character who's willing to say, enough of this, I'm going to do what's needed right now, and none of the laws are going to stop me, that's pretty decisive. T'Challa in Civil War. But Civil War does emphasize that he's motivated out of sort of blind revenge. So he needed to tone it back a little. That makes perfect sense. There was a similar complaint about Thor. In Thor, similar complaint about Thor being inconsistent in these few stories, like that in the movies where he's learning to be a dutiful king, many of the conflicts get repeated even though they don't need to be. Like in Thor 1, he willingly defies Odin right at the beginning of the movie. Yet in Thor 2, defying Odin's represented as sort of this big choice. The criticism being that there's an inconsistency, that Thor acts much more reserved or cautious than seems fitting for the character as we see him in the Avengers and in Thor 2, compared to what's established as being a Thor 1. And again, that sort of criticism doesn't really take into account the fact that that movie happened, that there's an end to that story, that Thor learns something. And in many ways, that reservation we see in the Avengers and Thor 2 is kind of an overcorrection. It's Thor's trying to balance it out. So he's too far one direction, he goes too far back the other way, overcorrects. I think the same thing's true for T'Challa. I mean, he's very independent and decisive in Civil War, but he continues to grow and learn from his experiences. Once he returns to Wakanda, he's still focused on discovering the right balance of his thoughts versus the advice of others. So I think the criticism that T'Challa may be reverting from what he displays in Civil War fits the idea of the character overcorrecting from his mistakes, starting the Black Panther movie, believing that the best course is to emulate his father rather than trust himself, because recently he was blinded by rage. Anyway, worldly attainment. He's the king. Yes, he has superpowers and super technology, and his people like him. Or at least the nobles ruling class seem to like him. Suffering. This is shown a lot in his expressions. He talks about being unsure he can live up to his father. In a lot of ways, I would say T'Challa doesn't suffer, at least not at the start of the film, in an extrinsic way, and that's what I'm defining relative to this formula. I'm going to count this as a mismatch for those reasons, but I actually do think that in Black Panther, T'Challa suffers in kind of a cunning way. T'Challa is suffering under the illusion of who his father was. He has this view of his own personal hero, of his dad being the ideal ruler, and that's not correct. He doesn't have a complete or honest view of his personal hero, and confronting that leads to a lot of suffering. Well, that's in the film. I still count it as a mismatch, but T'Challa is suffering due to his lack of knowledge or lack of understanding about who his father really is, or at least what he's fully capable of. Manifest the heroic powers, the black mantle of Black Panther. We've got the suit, you've got the heart-shaped herb strength, all that comes with it. People can criticize, etc., about that being kind of confusing or indirect. I don't know. It is. Spider-Man's got superpowers in his suit, and we never even see. We haven't seen the spider bite in the MCU. It just, we understand it. But again, in terms of fitting this formula, I would say no. I would say the manifestation doesn't fit this. If anything, there's some backpedaling since we already been introduced to the character and his powers in Civil War. I mean, he has independence, although an unhealthy version of it, which leads to him effectively usurping the Black Panther mantle and power, though this is never addressed in the movie Black Panther. So he just has the power. It fits for the story. We explicitly see him getting the power in terms of the trial by combat, which sort of fits, but he has to earn it. But it's kind of weird also because like he already has the opportunity to compete just by birth. It's his birthright to be in the contest. So I'm going to call it as not fitting. And just in general, I mean, re-earning it is weird. It's unclear. They don't really address what happened to it previously or what the real, Wakandan tradition about these things is. I think I would have really appreciated a line about this. I think it could have been really simple. His mother could have said something. I mean, it could have been like, T'Challa's imbibed the Black Panther juice twice. No one's had to do it a third time. We don't need any of this stuff. He comes back. He's king. His dad was king. Anybody question it? Whatever. Well, I guess it's kind of what they do. But anyway, I also would have appreciated something very clear about how the visions connect to the power, because the visions have a lot of the symbolic heroism and corruption happens in the visions. Like in his first vision, T'Challa is very happy to become like his father. He strives to do so. In the second vision, he rejects his father. He rejects him as a failure, announces he's unwilling to make those same mistakes. In terms of refinement, I'm going to say it's another mismatch. I mean, this fits, but only really in contrast to Killmonger. Yeah, he explicitly loses the power and then has to get it back, but there's no real connection between T'Challa's independent thinking that gets him there. You can argue that, he let the battle with Killmonger occur and no one else thought about doing that. That's independently thinking, although he suffers pretty greatly for that. And does seem sort of like coincidence that he doesn't die. So it doesn't really fit. But even so, it kind of fits more, any connection you draw would be more the responsibility or duty component to the power. The idea that Killmonger doesn't have those, even if he's strongly independent, and that's what makes it poor. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's just the relationship between T'Challa and his powers stays pretty consistent throughout the movie. I mean, if you expand it to his kingship, yeah, his policy and attitude shifts, but it's more about him personally changing and then how that reflects those decisions once they need to be made. He doesn't really actively refine anything. He's the monarch. How he refines his independence, the decision-making influences all that, but it doesn't have an influence really on the Black Panther suit. It's earned by birthright or by trial by combat or by the birthright to compete in the trial by combat. It's there. Anyway, let's talk. We're going to get to the fun stuff, because once we contrast Killmonger with T'Challa, I think is where a lot of the meat of this is. I mean, Ulysses Claw is the rival. Power without the trait, vibranium without the tradition. He pretty clearly represents, using the power of vibranium without respect for Wakanda, without respect for the traditions of responsibility Wakandans have learned with regards to this technology or resource. It's a weird way to phrase it, but since saying the central theme is independence, it does a little disjointed from this anyway. Claw clearly represents power without restraint. But then T'Challa and friends are hunting him. They kind of don't show very much restraint either. Actually, again, have some more comments to say that, but say about that. I'm ultimately going to count it as a fail. Oh, I have it listed in my script to count it as a fail. I apologize, I didn't highlight it as red. My bad. So that's 2 already, 2 more. Anyway, Mastermind, Eric Killmonger, on the other hand, a beautiful, contrasting mastermind. Worldly attainment, his motivation to succeed relies only on himself. It's made him a formidable and terrifying warrior. So much so, he's figured out how to use violence to conquer a powerful nation, or at least get himself on the throne. Yeah, I mean, sure, it's directly due to the royalty and the ceremony and blah, blah, but man, he could have just pulled off a coup or something. It's characterized as that's what he did in his everyday life, so it's there. Corrupted trait. In terms of worldly attainment, I mean, his motivation to succeed is what he's made himself very powerful, very capable. As a corrupted trait, independence without being self-critical. Killmonger is probably the most independent or lone wolf of any MCU characters. Like, Buffy was at least disjointed from the lifestyle. He didn't seem to like being on the run. Killmonger just embraces it wholly. Like, that's what he is. He's Killmonger. He's a kill machine. Again, while I settled on calling the heroic trait independence, the relationship of this idea is to generational succession much more symbolically and thematically direct in this movie. While T'Challa confronts the failures of his father and resolves to correct these mistakes to better himself, Killmonger just views his father as lacking power. He doesn't question his father's goals. He doesn't question if they were correct. He just... this is pretty explicit in their contrasting visions. Killmonger respects his father's ambition, but pities his fate. He effectively pities his father's weakness, but never questions his father's motives. Just Killmonger is going to be the better version of his father in the next generation, better because he'll have more power. Again, going back to the might makes right thing, but like just power is the only answer, as opposed to T'Challa, the hero, who is saying, no, there's stuff I can learn from, there's stuff I can do better on, there's stuff that I can look to the past and learn from, that's not just me being a stronger, more powerful actor of the ideas of the last generation. I am a new generation. I have new ideas. And I have to take the responsibility to form those. Yeah, and there's a lot more to say about these relationships and the themes in Black Panther. I'm just going to end it here, though, because I've already talked a lot about it. From a structural standpoint, the basic components are similar to the origin stories, but the movie Black Panther is distinct and contrasts it with the others. It's a lot of the differences seem intentional, like they wanted to try something different. This is synergistic to the idea of T'Challa as the independent thinker, that the writers found clever ways to follow the formula while deepening or transcending it and presenting explicit contrasts with several ideas from the previous origin stories. I'd love to do a video about the similarities between Black Panther and Thor 1 and what those differences say. I also think that these variations help emphasize and contrast between the way they're deviating in the movie Black Panther from the origin story are help to emphasize and contrast T'Challa versus Killmonger. I still think Killmonger himself isn't explored in full depth. Either way, though, compared to the other heroes, Black Panther is about being self-critical and balancing tradition versus innovation. The movie, that is. All right. We're going to have several simple ones and get two simple ones and then get more complex. But Spider-Man Homecoming, I don't want to get into this here, but Age of Ultron and Civil War work together that form an really interesting story about birth and succession. Not getting into it for another time, but in Civil War, both Black Panther and Spider-Man are effectively like the children of Iron Man and Captain America, and each share qualities from their parents. This is more of a structural or extrinsic analysis. Symbolically, they're also related, but that's a little less direct. But anyway, Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man himself and Spider-Man Homecoming are an origin story that to fit the formula pretty well. Compared to the more elaborate formula, Spider-Man Homecoming actually deviates in weird way. Well, I keep saying deviates in weird ways. I should have thought of better descriptors for that than weird. Sorry. But basically it just has some more action scenes kind of thrown in there. I don't know if that's Sony wanting to do that. Either way, it's not a bad movie. To me, it really works on sort of a it's kind of meta-reliant like Civil War was. If you don't care about the MCU, Civil War still works. If you don't care about the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming still works, but I think you get a lot more out of it. It's a lot more interesting if you're invested in the universe and the characters. It's interesting to see how the world changes as a direct consequence of the heroes and in general. But how does Spider-Man Homecoming fit this origin story pattern? In terms of heroic traits, I'm calling it diligence. Pretty simple. Peter Parker's hardworking. He's willing to continue working, even sacrificing his personal life for it. He has a solid motivations. Yeah, he's pretty much kind of a workaholic, but when challenged, his moral sense is good. It's grounded. He reasons through why he works and what he was. There's the quote from Civil War, when you can do the things I can do, but you don't, and bad stuff happens, then it's on you. In terms of worldly attainment, I am going to count this as a yes. His attainment is that he worked with the Avengers. I mean, his hobby heroics have been enough that Iron Man noticed him, and he's become his patron. Peter's much younger than the other characters, so a lot of the attainment story stuff would be odd. He's attained something personally important to him, although he's not quite satisfied with the progress of it. And suffering, yes, a lot. There are a lot of layers to this. It's a core aspect of Spider-Man stories. For simplicity here, I'm just going to present his personal life, friends, dating, family. All those things suffer because of his diligent hero activities, and I'll emphasize the distinction between Steve Rogers' sacrifice and Peter Parker's diligence. While Steve Rogers is always conscious of his sacrifice, it's a cost to accomplish an action, versus Peter Parker often focuses on the task at hand, the outcome he wants. He continues to diligently pursue the heroics, but only with a passing or partial assessment of how this may be a sacrifice to his personal life. I mean, to be clear, in most cases, Peter's optimistic. He arguably naive or self-deluded, but it usually leaves himself that hope that he can accomplish both. Like, skips the academic decathlon, but maybe he'll return in time, at least enough for the aftermath. He's lying to Stark about his activities, but ultimately it's to catch the bad guys and impress Mr. Stark. He leaves Homecoming Dance. Finishes Spider-Man work early. Why not go back? I mean, it's the same with the party. He left the party. Might as well go back. It's never super clearly stated. Like, he definitely thinks one or the other, but I'd say that his attitude portrays that he's like, oh, well, could happen. And Peter's diligence is his commitment to his work and the outcome above all else. A lot like Steve Rogers' sacrifice, and I'll talk about that later. But heroic power. Let's call that the Spider Advanced. All that goes with that, sticking to walls, super strength. Although, here's a curious twist on the formula. They're obviously Peter Parker is an enhanced superhuman. He has enhanced agency, superpowers. This movie, I'd say, pulls a really sly structural trick. I'll illustrate by just going through the motions here. So if I consider the heroic power to be the spider enhancement, manifestation, no, it happens before the story. Refinement, no, not really. He doesn't adjust it at all. It's just his motives that kind of change. But if I switch it up a bit, how about this? If I say from a structural standpoint in this film, being superhuman isn't his power, it's the Stark spider suit that improves his survival, etc. But more importantly, although it's not clear in the movie necessarily, presumably it gives him a better reach to fight crime, like access to satellites or surveillance or reports on crime. But that's technically speculation. I don't remember it being convincingly argued in the film. But it fits all the other stuff in terms of manifestation. I mean, the opening of the movie he's given the suit as a reward for his activities with Stark in Civil War. Tony's comfortable giving him an upgrade. It's super advanced, and even the line, I get to keep the suit. Refinement, indeed. I mean, Peter explicitly experiments with the suit and how to use its powers throughout the film. It's actually important to how he's able to track Vulture's gang and accomplish a lot of things he needs to when he's fighting these bad guys with super advanced technology. I mean, obviously, street crimes he seems more than competent to. And it's sort of connects to his diligence. I mean, it fits. It kind of fits blandly by default. Like, he learns about the suit by working diligently with it. That's intuitive. It's not really exciting. But anyway, the rival, Shocker. This is sort of buried in there, but it fits. That with the powers being suits or advanced weapons or Stark advanced weapons, however you want to do it, Shocker attains advanced weaponry without diligence, without any work. Even compared to the first Shocker, he literally has the power and the title just handed to him. Power without the trait, advanced weaponry without work, without diligence. Here's where we get some fun stuff. Vulture, Adrian Toomes, as the mastermind. Worldly attainment, successful business. It's a legal business, but it seems to be thriving. And with regards to the corrupted trait, kind of like Shocker, Toomes serves as a great foil for Spider-Man symbolically in this film. He also serves as a nice foil to Iron Man, which is impressive. But Vulture has a corrupted diligence. He cheats, he steals, he uses shortcuts. He's willing to put in the effort to find the shortcuts. He's willing to put in the effort to steal. But he's gonna, comparatively, if he could achieve the same thing by working harder, figuring out how to build these things himself, he's not going to do that. He's going to take the shorter route to the end point, even if that's morally compromising in some cases. So Vulture fits as mastermind with corrupted diligence. He also is a foil for Iron Man in this movie. Spider-Man's diligence and Iron Man's creativity are similar in that both of these characters have built themselves. Iron Man literally built his powers. Spider-Man gained superpowers by accident and is gifted the suit, but compared to a lot of the other heroes, he did kind of build himself up. I mean, for one, he's younger, but comes from a poor background. He puts in the effort to be a hero, despite the fact that using his time would benefit him or his family better, versus like Thor or Black Panther, who are kings and their powers are bestowed. I mean, and Steve Rogers also comes from nothing, but is effectively propelled to heroic status like as soon as he gets his powers. Anyway, Vulture contrasts with Iron Man in that he doesn't invent or create anything. Toombs runs the business, but one of his employees, Mason slash the Tinker, is the one who actually creates the weapons. And it's really fun how Vulture is like an anti-Iron Man, and that he clearly reflects both corrupted diligence and that he cheats and uses, will do illegal things to achieve what he wants in business, which makes him a creative businessman, a lot like Stain, using his creativity for illegal business. So, Spider-Man Homecoming fits pretty strongly, as does Doctor Strange. This one, Doctor Strange himself has the character has sort of an interesting symbolic intersection between Stark's creativity and Peter's diligence. Doctor Strange is creative and diligent, but he doesn't rely on those for the agency that magic gives him. If anything, he diligently uses that. He uses the time he has to study and learn about hidden threats to the world. His real power is in being the guy who's out there looking at all that stuff that no one else wants to spend the hours and hours and hours and devote their whole life to figuring out, because of the contingency where that might be a threat to the world. That's what he's committed to. Heroic trait, I've called it intellect. Understanding works on this sort of level of symbolic analysis much more, but there's a lot of layers to that, even as these words exist in our language. Maybe it's not the exact thing I want. Definitely has a component of knowledge and understanding. By intellect, I'm really referring, knowledge, intelligence, wisdom, and understanding. His strength, Doctor Strange's strength is in his obsessiveness, that he desires to understand as much as possible, and so when he's confronted with a challenge, he's careful not to make a misstep, and he wants to understand every consequence for the actions he has as much as possible. It's fitting for him being a doctor and a surgeon, because his transition to the mystic arts in a lot of ways is like using magic like surgical tools to be very precise in healing the world. It's a pretty stretched metaphor, but it's there. Worldly attainment, much like Stark, wealthy and respected doctor. Suffering, much like Stark, limited personal life. It's very similar to Iron Man. He's used his intelligence and career to become respected and rich, but nothing else, no family. Christine even makes the comment, that his personal life is basically just him still stroking his ego or elaborating on his career successes and his superior intellect. There's an obvious suffering from the accident, like Stark's chest reactor or Thor being stripped of power. The character is forced to try and change when their own old life becomes threatened or inaccessible. I haven't really considered that here, because that's more of functioning like a catalyst, propelling the characters to action or forcing them to change. It fits and lines up in some of these, but as I kind of outlined before, all of this is very centric to those individual symbols. So when I'm talking about suffering here, it's not just what component of an adventure catalyst could be suffering, it's what component of having that heroic trait has led to his suffering. Doctor Strange's superior intellect has ended up making him feel superior to everyone around him and act that way, so kind of created distractions for him. But heroic power, magic, kind of the time stone, sort of independent of that, but this one's more nebulous than some of the other characters in that it's obvious that other characters can also master magic. However, Doctor Strange is one of the few that's chosen at all to be able to learn it. It's through his commitment and his intellect that he's able to accomplish as much and more than others, and more quickly. The manifestation is through him seeking the magic, through the deeper understanding. Technically, he also has a sort of trial of dedication that he doesn't leave. Furthermore, again, he doesn't leave once he learns that Kamar-Taj is really there to protect the world from threats. In a lot of ways, it's more nebulous, because there's more of a continuum in terms of how much magic he knows, and when he decides to be, defender of the world with mystic arts, which happens very much around the time he confronts Caecilius initially. So it's a little there, but it's in there. And again, refinement, study and practice, years of it. This is reinforced multiple times. He steals books the masters say he's not ready for. He tweaks astral projection to learn how to study in his sleep. He accesses forbidden books and then accesses forbidden powers of the Time Stone. Mordo has an explicit line about this, like, how is it possible that someone in the amount of time you've been doing this could figure this stuff out? And much like Iron Man suits, magic, as it's used and represented in Doctor Strange, is very obviously connected to the skill and aptitude of the user. So refinement, the idea of refinement here to the power, just fits very naturally. And yes, it matches to his intellect and understanding very naturally, because it's magic. Symbols, again, sort of another home run here. compared to other stuff in this movie. Caecilius is the rival. Caecilius is presented very much as Doctor Strange on a different path. That Caecilius's world outlook is very similar to Doctor Strange at the start of the film. This movie fits the formula just very well. Caecilia is the rival and the agent of the mastermind who mirrors the protagonist. Power without the trait. Caecilius is interested in changing the world without understanding what he's doing. Caecilius is just driven by emotion, the sorrow for the loss of his family. He has access to powerful magic, wants to use it to change the world for the better, but is acting without understanding, without careful consideration or contemplation of what he's doing. He hasn't studied Dormammu. He hasn't studied what it means to merge Earth with the Dark Dimension or thought about it, or at least it's presented like he hasn't. It's presented like Caecilius has attached himself to one aspect of it, timelessness, that he believes all other effects just inconsequential compared to that one, and it's just going to be a mercy. That to freeze Earth in a moment is merciful because it prevents all future pain and suffering. Effectively, Caecilius is a pessimist. He at this point in the stories, he views the world as just generator of pain and suffering, and so to pause it is a net good to him overall. But he's wrong about some of the details. He's wrong about some of the effects this is going to his quest is going to cause, and he's unwilling to consider those things. Again, power without understanding, inducing change without understanding. Mastermind, Dormammu, very simple, very fitting. Even a literal source of power for the villains. Technically, it's a dark dimension. How those are connected is not made clear, but you know what I'm saying. Worldly attainment. Dormammu is a conqueror of worlds. You say what you will about him, he's certainly attained many worlds. In terms of a corrupted trait, it's there. He wants to devour everything, even though he's not really putting in the effort to understand what everything is. He's willing to devour all without understanding. He studies, learns, considers as much as he needs to understand to eat it, to devour it, to merge it with his dark dimension. He only really understands himself. The dark dimension, he's blind to understanding others beyond what he needs for conquest. While Doctor Strange can contemplate his own reality and other possibilities, Dormammu is just blind in himself and seeks to merge all realities into his one. Like Caecilius, the symbol of intellect is a little hard to apply. Its aspect of understanding fits pretty well. Dormammu and the Dark Dimension have a big role in the story, but Dormammu's barely on screen. When he is, Doctor Strange defeats him literally because Dormammu is willing to devour things he does not understand. That by beginning the merger with Earth, or maybe just the presence of Doctor Strange in the Dark Dimension, it's not super clear, but Dormammu is exposed to time, which allows Doctor Strange to use the Time Stone and lock them both in a moment. Doctor Strange wins the day by having superior understanding and intellect. He knows more about the situation than Dormammu and finds a solution within a threat Dormammu never considered. It's a pretty direct manifestation of this idea that both may have magic powers, but it's refined power through understanding and intellect that allows Doctor Strange to win over his opponents. Again, Doctor Strange fits the formula very well and has several elements that are very strongly reminiscent of Iron Man 1, even within the general origin story formula. Almost done. Guardians of the Galaxy 1. Up until this point, there have been plenty of deviations. Specific components that just don't fit or make sense in the formula as I outlined. From a writing standpoint, this should always be the case. If the formula was just universally consistent, things would be very boring, very fast. Guardians of the Galaxy 1 deviates from the origin story formula. I didn't even think it would fit it at first. I tried the analysis and noticed a lot of the markers are there. The central heroic trait for Star-Lord is much more nebulous than the others, in part because it has both an internal and external component, and I just can't find the right word for it. I think it's clearly defined in contrast. It's anti-apathy. In many ways, this becomes externalized as family, but I'm going to call the heroic trait, this anti-apathy, as inspiration for now. Motivation would be, I think, a little too odd. It's not like Star-Lord is solving problems by just motivating himself through it, but he does inspire others to act. You could call this compassion in the social sense as well, that he cares about others, learns to care about others at all. Specifically, is directed at the notion of family or a social unit, to care about something more than the individual. But there's also an internal piece to it, a drive, a mission, beyond base survival or instinct. Internal anti-apathy manifests as inspiration, something to drive, some drive, something to accomplish. Externally, anti-apathy manifests as family, something else or someone else to care about and act for. Star-Lord can very much be viewed as a child emerging into adulthood. Like, compared to, say, Captain America or Thor, it isn't just the theme of family that's unique to the story. Peter loses his family at the start of the film and shows an unwillingness to properly care about his mother. He rejects her request for closeness, seemingly out of a rejection that he could be someone who would open himself up to that he would be someone who would be vulnerable by caring for others, or care about what happens to someone else, which is placed right next to the lines about him, protecting the frog, or vengeance for the frog, I suppose. But worldly attainment. Hey, beginning of the story, Star-Lord has no family, no ties to anything, and he revels in that freedom. That freedom's allowed him to become a successful outlaw. As we later learn, he defected from an existing organization. I mean, that demonstrates a strong will to survive and competence. As an audience, we can infer that an outsider, like a earthling child, could probably only survive into adulthood if he was at least base competent. But Star-Lord is only inspired for his own interests. He's childlike mentality, only cares about what he wants, and he's uninspired to help others to do anything more than that. That in terms of suffering, although he enjoys his life, Peter suffers for being alone, and in the story frequently missteps and suffers because he's trying to do too much. Things he should be doing in a team, he's just doing on his own. He's a lone outlaw. That's how it works. Risk, I suppose. Heroic power, interestingly. While gadgets and weapons are the explicit means for Star-Lord to have superhuman power, it's in his allies that are his real power. This is conveniently contrasted by the setting. This is the first MCU with an Earthling hero outside of Earth and with access to advanced technology. In a world with that technology, it isn't the gadgets, it isn't the technology that makes Star-Lord powerful. It's his will to use them. His skill to use them as well, but it's the willingness to act that's important. Any humanoid alien could accomplish what he does with technology. His real power is his ability to inspire others. When he inspires others to act, at first, it's only by aligning their selfish interests. Later, after admitting to himself that he can care for others, he's able to inspire them to act in ways that help the whole galaxy. While this is an odd interpretation of the heroic power, I think it fits. I mean, the manifestation is weird, but yeah, inspiring others to join his cause, take positive action. He also inspires himself, bolstering the courage to take the actions rather than flee. I'll elaborate this some where I talk about the origin story in general, but one of the similarities here is that the end of Act 1 coincides with the manifestation of the heroic power and the confrontation of a bunch of goons. That the team for Guardians of the Galaxy, the team escapes from the kiln. Again, Iron Man uses his first suit to escape the Ten Rings. Banner becomes the Hulk to confront and escape the military. Thor and his friends fight the Frost Giants, and this is the first time we see Thor's power. Captain America chases Hydra agents through Brooklyn right after becoming Super Soldier. Ant-Man doesn't fit. T'Challa and his friends versus Claw and his goons in Korea. Spider-Man's kind of like when he chases the Salvager gang. That one doesn't really fit either. Doctor Strange and versus Caecilius' acolytes, though again, happening much later in the film. Happening later in the film, reality. The Guardians unite and escape the kiln. Anyway, refinement. As mentioned, Star-Lord's actions in negotiations initially just unite everybody, inspiring them to pursue their self-interested goals. Later, he recognizes he might be able to inspire them to act in a more positive way. It's not just about him learning to care, but to share that caring with others. While the internal-external of inspiration family is consistent, the climax demonstrates this conflict within Peter. To take Gamora's hand is to care about more than just himself, to open himself up to caring about others. It's the same as his failure at the start of the film, where he failed to properly care for his mother to try and shield himself from that pain. And in a lot of ways, he's been running from that pain his entire life because, as is established in the beginning, Peter's always hated bullies. He's always been willing to confront them, even if even if that lessens the pain of others. In this movie, the villains both have twisted inspirations for their actions. Inspiration's a messy word, but I'll elaborate in the context of inspiration for caring for others, inspiring others, and family. Power without the trait. So Ronan does not lack inspiration. Neither does Thanos. None of the villains lack inspiration, but to the contrary, Ronan is inspired to absolute conviction. And dangerous because of it. Despite his inspiration, he seems to care little for anyone else, and is apparently motivated out of a sense of glory, even more so than concern for his people. Like, Ronan apparently fails to inspire others and has no apparent family and does not seem to be supported by the Kree, his own people. And it's interesting that he even explicitly mentions that he's avenging his family, that his family's dead. In this way, Ronan does not have an externalized version of that trait, but has a very strong internalized version of that trait. He's a zealot. He represents zealous inspiration without the ability to inspire others or work with others beyond commanding them or controlling them. The worldly attainment is again split between both villains. Ronan has been able to acquire a ship. Sorry, one second. Ronan has been able to acquire a ship, a small army of mercenaries, presumably. Whatever his hammer is, though through the story, he even acquires an Infinity Stone. That's a lot. No matter how twisted or uninspirational his motivation is, he's accomplished a lot. And similarly, Thanos is feared and powerful. It's not really explored, just kind of left to the audience to believe. Thanos is extremely powerful and competent, presumably. Corrupted trait. Like Ronan, Thanos has a twisted inspiration, though this is not explored in the film. While Ronan represents a contrasting, twisted, internalized inspiration, Thanos represents a twisted externalization of it. It's unclear if Thanos cares for others, though he suggests that he does. He can obviously inspire others and to act, and even refers to them as members of an adopted family. Well, we don't understand exactly what Thanos wants beyond the Infinity Stone. We can clearly see he's able to inspire others to action and has a family, though it's unspoken. The family appears to be like a twisted mockery of the concept where the members remain like prisoners. But while Ronan is zealous, internalized inspiration without the ability to inspire others, Thanos is zealous, externalized inspiration where he erases the wills of others, adopting them into a family and expanding his power by sending them out as agents in place of himself, to pursue his will, not their own. Three of the other Guardians also sort of coordinate the idea of inspiration by being twisted in some way. Rocket is inspired to take action even at the start of the movie. He's a successful bounty hunter and even inspires Groot to follow him, but is quite antisocial, and he lacks the proper inspiration to act in a way that helps others. In many ways, he's stunted in his emotional development like Peter. While Peter represents a kind of social emotional isolation, Rocket's just antisocial. He's happy to walk around others and just casually insult them. And he starts the story having very little respect or interest in anyone else, but learns to fight, even sacrifice himself to save others. Sorry. I need to find a better way. I apologize for the pause. Drax. Drax is inspired by revenge. He's also broken by it. He's willing to effectively throw his life away in pursuing it rather than carefully planning his attack. His relationship to his inspiration is unhealthy. He needs to do more than simply act for himself. He needs to cooperate with others. Interestingly, Drax had a family. the family he loved, and he lost them, and in many ways it's blinded to the idea that anyone else could ever fulfill a similar role in his life, so much so that he's unwilling to even try and basically has to die to learn that lesson. I think it's significant that Drax is the one who initially confronts Ronan. I mean, they both have unhealthy internalizations of their inspiration. They both have lost their family. I interpret their conflict as saying that they manifest themselves in their battle as the same thing. It's a contest of their powers and their zealousness. Ronan wins. When all someone brings to the fight is pure conviction, the outcome is just going to be purely determined on physical power. You can say that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on the story you're talking about. But Drax loses that fight, and Drax rises again and learns to work with others in order to defeat his enemies. Gamora seems to have been inspired previously, but spent her efforts in a corrupt institution. While the story portrays her rejection of Thanos as more direct, as like a prisoner breaking free, the audience understands that Gamora isn't quitting her old job for no reason. It's likely that she had opportunities to leave in the past. The orb, its profit, maybe the reason it's happening now. According to Gamora herself, she's leaving because she lacks interest in Thanos' vision. Not that she's unwilling to fight or oppose someone or oppose him directly, at least as it's said in the second act, but she's tired of wasting her life. She's tired of aiding a goal she cares little for or that she thinks is immoral. Gamora's been broken by disappointment and needs to find a new purpose. This is also why she's much more easily persuaded by Star-Lord. She's been inspired before and simply needs to find the right mission. Same is true of an adopted family. She already had one. She just needs the right one. Versus the other Guardians who are a bit further behind in their goals and development. While all the movies have periphery characters that aid the protagonist, they don't always serve as foils with any clear symbolic relevance. Like, some do, Rhodey in the Iron Man movies, but the Guardians are kind of a step above that in that they're more fully developed, except Groot. I don't know, they all, except Groot, act around that central symbol of inspiration and family, and they must be unified in order to care about each other and to help work as a team to save the galaxy, right? In line with Peter's ability to inspire as not even necessarily their leader, but the one who inspires them to action. Though indeed, Groot is inspired to sacrifice himself for the team at the end of the movie, and I would argue Rocket is too, crashing his ship into Ronan's ship. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 continues in the concept of family and more deeply explores and contrasts this sort of internalized inspiration focus on Guardians of the Galaxy 1 into family. Unsurprisingly, in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, what do we see? We see a family split apart, made unwhole and suffering individually until they bring themselves back together. It seems very likely to me that Guardians of the Galaxy 3, if it ever happens, is going to continue this and explore loss, or how the family can survive when it suffers an irreversible loss or injury. Either way, Guardians of the Galaxy, you gotta stretch things to make it fit, and you've heard my reasoning. You either agree or you don't disagree. So I apologize for these battery thing back and forth, but we're pretty much, well, closing remarks. But we're pretty much done here. After that long march through the origin story films, I'm going to address a few of the remaining issues related to the symbolic analysis of these characters. I'll comment on whether the formula seems appropriate based on hits and misses. Based on the formula, I'm going to predict some things about Captain Marvel, and I'm going to quickly comment on clear symbolic connections between sort of two generations of heroes across these origin stories, and then very brief mention about some other parallels I see. Mentioned Dialogue of Pessimism. It's sort of an ancient text. So apparently there's 3 missing from this. I apologize. That's my fault. I'll make an updated version, but I don't know if I'll do the updated version of the video because time. But my formula, by my analysis, the origin stories fit pretty well. The heroic trait and power are the only universals. It's not too surprising. I'm skipping Guardians of the Galaxy since it's a stretch whether it applies at all, and you either agree with that or you disagree with that, and I don't want to mix that in here. All the other components have, all the components except for the heroic trait and heroic power violated at least once. Thanks Ant-Man for that. And I've left Thor 1 as sort of, with parentheses, ambiguous, since many may disagree with my characterization of Laufey as the rival. Obviously, fan reactions are diverse. by this formula, although it's curious to me that Incredible Hulk, Thor 1, Ant-Man, and Black Panther stick out as having notable deviations, including even a slight trend in Captain America 1. Read into that what you will based on the way fans have reacted to these movies versus the others. Ultimately, I think the formula holds up as a basic skeleton. You know, my initial hypothesis, I say it's there, or at least you can argue it's there, at least to arrive at symbolic meaning, so whatever. A lot of these elements are consistent, notably the symbolic connection between the heroes and the villains. That's the point of this video. I think it's there. I predict that... Sorry, one second. I predict that Captain Marvel will symbolically represent honor or respectfulness. Since it's probably going to be focused on the soldier side of the story, I think it's honor is probably the best description. I'm kind of clueless as to how they're going to handle the origin of her power. I do have some thoughts, though, and I think it will be clear that her worldly attainment's going to be the respect of her compatriots, which looks like, at least at the start of the story, to be the Kree Star Force, maybe connected in some way to the origin or source of her power. Suffering, well, it seems like she's been abducted from Earth, realizing this, and the loss of her past life is probably the suffering or part of the suffering. The hints that a close friend in the Air Force, she might have a close friend in the Air Force, then I would take that and say, probably suggesting that character's going to die or be injured, and Carol's going to blame herself for that character's death or injury, and I'm also guessing that's going to happen in some coincidence with how she encounters the Kree and or manifests her superhuman powers. Again, her powers, the Captain Marvel powers, cosmic energy absorption, flight, energy blasts, all that stuff. Manifestation, don't really know. If I had to guess, I'd say it would look like Danvers is going to be an exemplary soldier. The idea will be that the Kree Star Force, elite warriors of the Kree, genetically or technologically or whatever, imbued with the best among Kree modifications and technology, they'll realize that she has some value and keep her around. Like, that somehow it's going to end up with them analyzing her, and then they're going to realize, hey, not only are humans physically compatible with some of these upgrades, but Danvers is an exemplary soldier with a few psychic modifications, post memories here or there. She'd be a very valuable member of our Kree Star Force. I'm guessing this is going to coincide with a loss of a member of their team, such as Marvel, like she's a replacement Captain Marvel. Something like a mission to Earth, where they lose a member and adopt Danvers, and then realize she's extremely valuable, so they keep her around. And based on that idea, I'm guessing that the MCU trope of a head injury gets rid of mind control is also going to be at play. Based, the opening of the trailer where she falls to Earth. So, refinement, I'm guessing this will be tied to the Kree Star Force, that she may initially respect them as well as, and then they try to kill her or abuse her or treat her dishonorably, and then she might act dishonorable in return. By acting with honor, that'll help her properly refine her powers, in fitting with that. To the villains, rival and mastermind, seems like Jan Rog as a rival, probably as a teammate within the Kree Star Force, and some Skrull as a mastermind is kind of my guess. If I had to say it, I'm going to guess Ronin's just kind of a cameo, probably going to function like an operations leader or something for their team. Maybe important character, but not a rival or mastermind. Though maybe he's a mastermind, but I mean, Jan Rog is going to very clearly be a rival. He's going to pretty clearly compete with Captain Marvel as the rival, clearly reflect the absence of honor. He'll have the same powers or similar powers, but not be able to wield them as well, because even if they're very close, she will be wielding the powers honorably. That will lead to her victory over Jan Rog. My guess, at least. And I think honor is an interesting symbol to potentially contrast with the Skrulls. I think it's entirely possible that they may integrate some aspects of the Skrull origin story into this film, that the Skrulls were motivated by the Kree. I mean, to war by the Kree. That's a thing in the comics, that Skrulls, might not have been the nicest people. They weren't like the Kree going around eternal war, but after they interact with the Kree, they kind of are. So whoever the Skrull mastermind is, at least by my prediction, I think it will be acting out of its own sense of honor that leads to deception and generally dishonorable treatment of enemies. So the Skrulls are likely to be portrayed as extremely tribal. That the Skrull mastermind acts honorably in that it acts for the benefit of its own people, but dishonorable or disrespectful in treatments of everyone outside the tribe. Alternatively, maybe the Skrulls are going to be the ones that just make the cameo, and then be troops or something to fight through the film, and Ronan will actually be the mastermind. It's likely that the Kree Star Force is going to turn on Captain Marvel at some point for not being true Kree, and once she acts in a way they dislike, Ronan is a very fitting character to be like, I'm going to use her and then dishonorably set up circumstances to kill her because that's the right thing to do. Either way, Ronan or the Skrulls, I'm going to say that the corrupted trait will be tribalistic honor. I believe it will be sort of like a corrupted honor, which is effectively like I act honorably for the people that are in my in group, and everyone else, not the case. Interesting little contrast there. So one of the fun aspects of these films is that we had 4 origin stories preceding the Avengers: Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and Incredible Hulk. And 4 more very character-centric movies series that have started since then. Ant-Man and then I argued for Guardians of the Galaxy are there, but I think both of those will be sort of treated on their own. In a lot of ways in the Phase 2, they kind of felt that way too. Like, they seemed almost more like genre expansions. In the same way, I mean, Captain America 2 felt that way too, where it was like, Ant-Man's like we're doing a superhero heist movie. Guardians of the Galaxy is like we're doing a superhero alien movie. Captain America 2 is like we're doing a superhero spy movie. Anyway, obviously, Marvel Studios would like to make as many movies as possible, at least that people would pay a lot of money to see. Doing a 4 versus 4 here analysis, there's an interesting sort of pattern in the symbols that's almost like an evolution or progression of ideas, where we have sort of Iron Man, the hero of creativity, becoming Black Panther, hero of independence, Captain America to Spider-Man, Thor to Captain Marvel, and Hulk to Doctor Strange. So what I mean by this, Black Panther is the new Iron Man. Creativity is refined into independent thinking. As I mentioned earlier, Black Panther and Spider-Man are both have traits share similarities with Iron Man and Captain America. But Black Panther is the guy who wears the awesome suit and is effectively next generation Iron Man. Spider-Man may have all sorts of invention capabilities, but Black Panther's got the resources. Although Strange and Parker are both pretty smart, T'Challa will provide the role of the tech expert as well as, the bank if the team needs money. They encounter technology or tech-empowered villains, it's Black Panther's going to be the one in charge. Spider-Man is the new Captain America. Sacrifice is refined into diligence. I discussed this earlier, but beyond heroic self-sacrifice, which is more general than Captain America's symbolic power of sacrifice, Spider-Man refines this into selective sacrifice. Trade-offs. Spider-Man will make sacrifices as part of being diligent, inherently sacrificing his time and other things he could accomplish with it for, heroic time for the greater good. More explicitly, I mean, also Danvers, T'Challa, and Doctor Strange form a pretty lawful, orderly bunch of people. Like Steve Rogers, Peter Parker is going to be the team member willing to criticize the mission, willing to point out flaws. Even if the team's confident to act, he's going to be the one saying, hey, wait a minute, guys. We got to do the right thing here, even if it's not the thing we're supposed to do. Captain Marvel is the new Thor. If duty is refined into honor, this is pretty much a writing choice. Like, both characters clearly overlap on this. Extrinsically, Captain Marvel and Thor have somewhat similar powers, at least from a writing standpoint: flying, shooting, super strong. It's the cleanest fit for a succession. I just mean that kind of like a role that you could write for Thor in these movies relating to duty. It's probably going to be not too much tassel to rewrite that to be honor with Captain Marvel in the same power set or similar power set. Doctor Strange is the new Hulk. Responsibility is refined into understanding or intellect. Here, the fit is more like a caged powerhouse as well. While Danvers and Thor casually wield extreme power, Hulk and Strange have it bottled up and saved for when it's needed. Symbolically, while Banner is responsible and selectively allowing the Hulk to be used, Strange similarly uses intellect understanding to find the situations where magic should be used, or choose to unleash the magic. The trajectory of Spider-Man is dubious with Sony. there's at least going to be a trilogy. I'm not sure if Captain Marvel will get her own trilogy. I think Black Panther and Doctor Strange will each get their own trilogies. I think Doctor Strange films are going to be mostly independent, focused on magic, outside threats, their own fun stuff. While Black Panthers, I think, is going to be sort of the central Earth story that might even adopt Captain Marvel and turn into sort of a Wakanda versus the Skrulls. I think they're going to reveal that part of Wakandan isolationism is that they're aware of the Skrulls' presence on Earth and have avoided sharing the technology with them for fear that it would just accelerate Skrull conquest of the planet. I also think it's likely that there's going to be an upcoming... In Avengers 4, I think there's going to be an unsnapping where the snap deaths are undone. It's not the same as the deaths that result from the snap deaths. Those are just permanent dead, maybe, probably. Anyway, but I think there'll be an unsnapping, and that then when you return the people back to Earth, if they're Skrull shapeshifters, they might be in their native forms, not their shapeshifted forms. So that's a compounding crisis on top of a crisis. The Black Panther movies, I think, will explore this. I think Black Panther 3 may actually even be like Avengers 5 or be the Secret Invasion movie. I also think there'll be a reason that these four specifically team up. It may be connected, and it may be connected to Snap, that Danvers might be able to prove or have worked with T'Challa, know that he's human, while Parker and Strange both got snapped off-world. I somehow that might work in, or be how they get it. I don't know. But I think there's a good chance these four will team up versus the Skrulls in some way. Maybe Doctor Strange will just be left out because he's Doctor Strange. And who knows? I didn't add this slide in here. I did have a little bit more comment where, in terms of few remaining patterns, Hero's Journey formula mentions that there's mentors, and there are a lot of mentors in these films. I apologize for not having a slide representing it. In Iron Man, it's Jensen. None in Incredible Hulk. Thor, it's Odin. Captain America, Dr. Erskine. Star-Lord, you can say Yondu. Ant-Man, it's Hank Pym to Scott Lang. And Doctor Strange, the Ancient One. And Spider-Man Homecoming, it's Tony Stark. And in Black Panther, T'Chaka. Those mentors are there, and it's a bit more stable in the Phase 1 films, where the mentors literally die or become inactive by the end of Act 1. So it's like they're there, they're a mentor, then they're gone. But generally, the role of mentors does vary between these stories, and again, that's a much more extrinsic structural component. I'll talk about it in the origin story formula, but not here. The worldly attainment of the heroes can be compared in some ways to this thing called the Dialogue of Pessimism. It's an ancient text that, among other things, it has a list of sort of lifely pursuits, in a sense, a list of things you could devote your life to accomplishing or to pursuing. About half of them do fit with the MCU heroic attainments. It's not a perfect match, and I certainly doubt there's a direct relationship there. I think from a writing standpoint, they just serve as recurrent foci of human activity. So true thousands of years ago as it is today. But just going through the Dialogue of Pessimism, the ones that it mentions, it has like driving to the palace, which is like political power, not really in the MCU movies directly. Food, which is like hedonism, I would argue Star-Lord, Guardians of the Galaxy. Hunting, which is like hobby pursuits, and I would say that Spider-Man in many ways is being an Avengers, like his hobby. Marriage fits with that sort of interpreting Ant-Man as having the family. Litigation, you can kind of argue that's like ego, personal power. It's kind of difficult to interpret in the original dialogue. Revolution also is like, is that changing the world? Is that fame? Is that narcissism? It could be any of them. If you stretch it more enough, it's going to fit everything, so let's just leave it out. Sex, nope, no one does that. Sacrifice, hey, there it is directly, referring to, again, that, a lot of ways, heroic sacrifice, that idea that you could become loved and revered because other people are like, hey, you sacrificed for us, we like that. Investments, which is like saying wealth, which you have two characters, Iron Man and Doctor Strange, who both accomplish wealth. Public service, again, sacrifice, like Captain America. So, thank you very much for watching. I know that was a lot to get through. I'm sorry to just be rambling through it. It's obviously a big work. It's a work in progress, and I'd absolutely love feedback. I want to discuss this in detail, especially the opposing ideas. I don't have this right. Like I said, it's very... Symbolic analysis is tricky because I can just kind of throw it out there, say, hey, this evidence argues for it, and it's not always easy to clearly identify... Like, I've tried my best to identify where those rules don't apply. It's not always easy to see things like, no, this applies, this contradicts it, this goes in the other direction. If it's outside that formula. But would absolutely love feedback and want to discuss this and get details on opposing ideas. So how to refine these ideas, which ones I have wrong, etc. Anything you think or see, agree with, disagree with, please share in the comments. This has been a big dump of ideas I have about the MCU, and as I mentioned, I mean, if this, I have a lot more thinking on stuff like this, both with MCU and other series, but a lot on the MCU. If people like it, if this gets a positive response, I'll work on making more. As I mentioned, part of thinking this way is to try and make generative models. One of my big interests is in sort of finding formulas and spaces that can be applied to making new stories. And that applies both to what I consider static narratives like writing and screenplays and things like that, but also to interactive narratives, just video games, tabletop RPGs, where things are a little more nebulous. Yeah, for me, it's tabletop gaming is where I get a lot of the application for these generalized models. But maybe it works under creative writing. I think it should. And if not, hey, if this is the most disliked video of all the whatever, I'll just keep working on these ideas. Maybe this was too premature and I shouldn't have shared them yet. But thanks again for watching, and thank you so much. Please share any thoughts you have. Have a good one.